Let's start with a short review of what we've covered so far so we sort of know where we're at before we move on. So we're looking at the Heart Sutra here, of course, teaching of the Buddha, coming from this second turning of the wheel of Dharma. The teachings collectively called the Perfection of Wisdom teachings. And of course in the Sanskrit title that's the Prajna Paramita. So the Prajna Paramita, or perfection of wisdom, of course, is the wisdom of emptiness. It's a realization of emptiness that enables us to achieve the goal of enlightenment. So for the wisdom of emptiness to enable us to achieve the goal of enlightenment, that needs to come together with the bodhicitta motivation. So the perfection of wisdom is the realization of emptiness supported by the aspiration of bodhicitta. And so that, of course, is the main topic of this teaching, the Heart Sutra, is what is this wisdom of emptiness and how do we go about cultivating it? And so we saw here in the Heart Sutra that the setting, the prologue, was that this teaching took place in a little hill called Vulture's Peak, just outside of Rajgir. Rajgir was where the king of the region, the central region of India called Magadha, that was where he was living. It was King Bimbisara. And here we have, of course, the Buddha, who's referred to as the Bhagavan here. So the Bhagavan is another word for the Buddha, someone who has eliminated these, what's called the two obscurations, which we'll be looking at a little bit later, what these two obscurations are. And also present, of course, were a great community of monks and a great community of bodhisattvas. So here the word monk is really referring to those who are aspiring to the goal of nirvana. The bodhisattvas, of course, are the ones aspiring to the further goal of enlightenment. So we have a large gathering present. And then also we see that present is Avalokiteshvara, who is the Buddha of compassion, but here he's appearing as a high-level bodhisattva for the benefit of the audience. And he's contemplating this practice of emptiness as well, and seeing that the five aggregates also are empty of inherent nature, meaning not just the person is empty of inherent nature, but the basis of the person, five aggregates, or in other words, the body and the mind, are also empty of inherent nature, implying also that we should start by first investigating me, the person. How do I exist to come to realize the person is empty of inherent nature? And then we can go on to investigate the body, the mind, and other phenomena as well. And then also here present is Shariputra. And Shariputra here is appearing as an arhat, someone who's achieved nirvana, but appearing as someone who doesn't really know what this wisdom of emptiness is. And so he's asking to Avalokiteshvara, how should anyone, and he calls himself here as the son of the lineage. So son of the lineage means here is the Mahayana lineage. And we activate our Mahayana lineage when we develop great compassion. So when we have this great compassion, this aspiration, aspiring to follow the Mahayana path to enlightenment, we have activated the lineage. So someone who's done that, how should they practice this wisdom of emptiness? This is what Shariputra is asking. And here in Avalokiteshvara's reply, which is quite extensive, we see that this reply can be related to the various stages along the path to enlightenment. And the first part of the answer, which we're looking at now, is related to the first two stages of the Mahayana path, path of accumulation, path of preparation. And this advice is also the same advice on how we as beginners are to practice this wisdom of emptiness. And the short answer is to correctly and repeatedly behold those five aggregates also as empty of inherent nature. Or another slightly different way of translating that was this repeatedly, to translate that as subsequently. to subsequently see or behold in a correct way that the five aggregates are also empty of inherent nature. So to subsequently see means subsequent to investigation, that we need to investigate in a very logical, methodical way the person, the body, mind, or phenomena, to subsequently come to see that everything's empty of inherent nature. And so that's where we are now. And so we looked at the five aggregates, the presentation of the five aggregates, in terms of that the five aggregates are often a presentation of the basis of the person, the body and the mind. The first of the five aggregates, the form aggregate, is the body, and then the other four aggregates collectively is the mind. And so here we see that we are to investigate in a very logical, methodical way to subsequently see that the person, the body and the mind also are empty of inherent nature. So what does this word inherent nature mean? So here this word inherent nature is another term meaning independent existence. And there are a number of terms used in the various texts to describe independent existence. The most common term that you often see is this word inherent existence, or here the very similar word of inherent nature. So the idea of inherent existence or inherent nature is that things seem to be self-existent. They have their own unique nature of being that thing. That the world is made up of many separate, discrete things, each one having their own unique nature. So that's what the word inherent existence means. Another term that's often used is things existing from their own side. So something existing from its own side has the idea that it does not require an observer or agent for it to exist. It simply exists from its own side, independent of an observer. And so this is the idea that the world is already out there existing from its own side, just waiting for us to come along to confirm those things that already exist. So that's existing from its own side. Another term that you often see is true existence. So the word true generally means something is true if it does not deceive us. Now, things appear to exist independent of us. And if that's how they really exist, they would be true. Meaning, the way in which they appear and the way in which they actually exist matches. So true existence means existing in the same way in which it appears. So those are the three most common terms we see used to describe independent existence. And here we have that word inherent nature, which is more or less the same as inherent existence. So they're all talking about the same thing from a slightly different perspective. This is really talking about inherent existence or inherent nature. Things are self-existent. They have their own unique nature of being that thing. Existing from its own side, meaning things are pre-existing. They don't need an observer for them to exist. And true existence means existing in the same way in which it appears. Any questions about any of those terms?
When you say independent existence, it's not the same as true existence, because if we look at things that are independent of, there are causes and conditions that we all know. Things depend on causes and conditions. But usually we do not realize that things depend on the mind to appear to it.
Correct.
So I feel it's not the same.
What's not the same?
Say that things are independent and things are
True existence.
true, exist as they appear, which means things can be true existing if it appears to us that we know there are terms and conditions that they depend on.
Right. But here the word true doesn't mean depending on causes and conditions. The word true here is meaning, does it exist in the same way in which it appears? In the sense that things appear to exist independent of us, and if they exist in that way, if they do exist independent of us, they would be true. So that's the meaning of true here. It doesn't mean, is there causal efficacy? I mean, we could use the word true in that sense. You know, things are true if they work. If they don't work, they're not true. But that's not how the word true is used here. It's only in terms of appearance, not in terms of functionality. Of? Right. This pen. This pen appears to exist independent of us. It appears to have inherent existence because it appears to be self-existent. It appears, if this has its own unique nature of being a pen, it's self-existent. So that's this. And it appears to exist from its own side, meaning there appears to be a pen here existing, waiting for us to come along and confirm, yes, there's a pen there. And true existence, it appears to exist independent of us, and we believe that that's the case. So it seems to truly exist. It seems to exist in the same way in which it appears. So that's this term.
Sorry, but for me it sounds the same. My
Exactly.
but
Exactly.
it sounds
All of
the
these
same.
4 words are the same. They mean the same thing. They're different words to describe the same thing from different perspectives. So these words are very helpful because they get us to better understand what do we mean by this. Because they're describing this from a different angles. So if we understand each one of those, we have a better understanding of what that really means. Yeah, they mean exactly the same thing. Exactly.
Can you please give an example what is a non-independent existence?
Oh, well, that's coming up. That's in the next session.
When you say existing without observer,
Right.
it's a little bit different than all the others. True existence. It's something different. Am I right? No? No?
Yes and no, but we're coming to this.
Someone
We're coming to this.
creating in the non-observer.
This is coming. It's coming. Don't worry. I'm going to talk about this a little bit later. So we're sort of slowly coming up to this topic. Okay. So then we've got the next section here. So that's the brief answer. And now this is unpacked a little bit more. This idea that not just the person but the body and mind are also empty of inherent nature. So this is explained in a little bit more detail in the following paragraph, which is probably the most well-known part of the Heart Sutra, which says, form is empty, emptiness is form, emptiness is not other than form is also not other than emptiness. And to begin our discussions on these 4 points, I'd like to introduce this topic here by reading a little bit from a book by Alan Wallace called Tibetan Buddhism from the Ground Up. And the section in the book is called What is Really There? So this is what he says. Many of us believe that we directly perceive objective physical phenomena with our 5 physical senses, that the mental images we perceive via our senses are accurate representations of the objects we perceive. However, neurologist Antonio Damasio refutes this assumption, which is commonly called naive realism. So now he's quoting the neurologist who says the following. When you and I look at an object outside of ourselves, we form comparable images in our respective brains. We know this well because you and I can describe the object in very similar ways down to fine details. But that does not mean that the image we see is the copy of whatever the object outside is like. Whatever it is like in absolute terms, we do not know. Now back to Alan Wallace, he says the following. In light of this neuroscientific view, with our 5 senses, we directly perceive images generated in the brain. But these are not truly representations of anything existing independently of the brain. These sensory impressions of colours, sounds, smells, and so on are no more tangible than thoughts or dreams. While we seem to experience colours and so on as they exist in the objective world, independent of our senses, this is an illusion, very much like a dream. Having determined that the reality we perceive depends on our sense faculties, what then really does exist outside our senses? When we close this book and leave the room, shutting the door behind us, what remains? It is an ancient question that has been asked since the time of the Greeks. What exists behind appearances? What really exists out there? This brings up a familiar problem. What happens when a tree falls and nobody is in the forest to watch it or hear it? Most people agree something happened. The tree trunk is on the ground, there is a big dent, things start to rot, and ants and termites live in the fallen trunk. But what happened? Western scientists have traditionally responded to this question by trying to find primary or intrinsic qualities of the falling tree that can be measured. Mass is one of those, the idea being that the tree has a quantifiable amount of stuff to it. Speed is another quality that does not seem to depend on anyone's perception. Briefly considering the history of Western scientific thinking on this point may be a useful digression that may help us better understand the nature of emptiness. Also, by examining our cultural assumptions about the nature of reality, we can better understand and penetrate those assumptions, and by so doing, come to appreciate the Buddhist view. Since Galileo took his telescope and turned it on Jupiter, scientific thought has increasingly depended on the power of mechanical instruments. We get the sense, and it is widely promoted by science, that by using mechanical instruments and mathematics, we stop being subjective and instead become objective. Everyone knows the senses can be misleading, it is said, so let us dispense with the senses. They are giving us only appearances anyway, and we're trying to penetrate through those. The idea of objective measurement came to be strongly emphasized during the time of Galileo, and by the end of the 19th century, scientists felt the objective science of physics was virtually complete. The physics of the time was assumed, with very few exceptions, to be an absolute representation of what was really out there. At the beginning of the 20th century, this view began to break down. Scientists started to understand more clearly that their instruments of measurement were themselves contributing to the data they were detecting. But the real revolution came with the development of quantum physics, which investigates the very smallest components of physical reality. It is here that the participatory nature of measurement and experimentation becomes most obvious. In quantum mechanics, attributes of mass, speed, shape, and location vanish as purely objective entities. All of them can only be seen in relationship to the methods of measurement. As the renowned physicist Werner Heisenberg said, what we observe is not nature itself, but nature exposed to our method of questioning. As scientists looked still deeper, they also started questioning the objectivity of the analytical tools they use. Mathematics, for instance, is one more human creation. Euclidean geometry is only one of a theoretically infinite number of geometries that can be used, and the same goes for algebra and for various logic systems. The subjective element seems to be inescapable on all fronts. In no facet of science, whether we are dealing with astronomy, physics, or medicine, do we get even one bit of information about any reality existing independently of our modes of questioning. All our sensory experiences consists of experiences that are contingent upon our sense faculties. Even by reducing everything to the subatomic level of electrons, quarks, and so forth, we are still left with nothing but appearances. What is inescapable is that all we know of the world, theoretically and empirically, consists of appearances to the mind. We have access to nothing else. Understanding this, the concept of reification becomes universally applicable. In the same way we look out on the world and view perceived objects as if they existed inherently in objective space, so too do we view things like electrons and sound waves as if they existed independently of our conceptions of them. Perceived objects exist in relation to the conceptual schemata within which they are understood. We reify an object by removing it from its context, by ignoring the subjective influences of perception and conception. Okay. So let's have a look at these four statements and see if we can make some understanding of them. So we have four statements. Form is empty, emptiness is form, emptiness is not other than form is also another than emptiness. These four statements are called the fourfold profundity. So the first statement, form is empty, is the profundity. Remember, profundity is another word for emptiness. It's the profundity of the ultimate, meaning what is the ultimate nature of form? And the statement is form is empty. So remember, when we see this word form is empty, we have to ask empty of what? What is form empty of? And form is empty of independent existence, inherent existence, existing from its own side, empty of true existence. So this statement then that form is empty, say, of inherent existence, this is emptiness. So emptiness is not saying nothing exists. So form is empty is not saying form doesn't exist. It says form is empty of existing in this way, meaning it does not exist independently. So emptiness is describing how things exist through negation, through negating that things are independently existent. You may ask then, what is the problem in seeing things existing independently? What is the problem in seeing that there is a world already out there made up of many separate discrete things? Why is that a problem, to see the world in this way? So to answer that, we'll go to this suffering and its causes chart, because there's the answer. In the first step of the process, we have what's called seed of ignorance. Ignorance, in general, is simply a deluded state of mind that is confused about its object. But here, we're talking about a specific type of ignorance. This ignorance is confused about how things exist. And this ignorance is not simply not understanding how things exist, but it's misunderstanding how things exist. So here, ignorance is grasping onto independent me, independent world. That's what ignorance is here. And seed of ignorance is basically the habit of doing that. The habit of seeing there's an independent me here, independent world there. And we've had that habit since we were born, and according to Buddhism, a long time before that. So we have the habit of grasping onto an independent me, an independent world. And when we look out on the world, everything that we see appears to exist independent of us. And that is called mistaken dualistic appearance. So duality here, of course, means there seems to be subject-object duality. There appears to be me here, world there. And this view of emptiness is saying things are not existing as they appear. There appears to be an independent world there, but that's not how things exist. So this appearance that we are receiving is deceiving us. That's why it's called mistaken, because things are not existing as they appear. So this appearance that we receive is called mistaken dualistic appearance. There appears to be subject-object duality. Me here, world there, appears to exist independent of me. Now, we have the habit of believing this because, and that appearance has always been there. We have never seen the world in any other way. So there's no reason for us to question these appearances. And if we ask anyone else, everyone else will say the same thing. Yes, the world appears to be independent of me. So there's no reason for us to question these appearances. So we never do. We just automatically accept, which is step 2. Which is ignorance. Ignorance is now we're grasping on independent me, independent world. And as we saw in the 5 aggregates presentation, in every one of our experiences, there is this mental factor of feeling present. And remember, this mental factor of feeling is simply experiencing things as either pleasant, unpleasant, neutral. Neutral just means neither pleasant nor unpleasant. So let's say we're looking at these flowers here. They appear to exist independent of us. We have the habit of believing that, so we just automatically accept, yes, those flowers are existing there independent of me. Let's say when we look at these flowers, we're having a pleasant experience. That pleasant experience, together with the belief that those flowers are independent of me, will naturally lead me to assume there must be some attractive quality there that's causing my pleasant experience. So we'll see that those flowers are inherently attractive, that the attractive quality is there. And this view of emptiness, of course, is saying this is a misconception. Or, when I look at these flowers, and let's say I have an unpleasant experience, that unpleasant experience, together with the belief that those flowers are independent of me, will naturally lead me to assume there must be some unattractive quality there that's causing my unpleasant experience. We'll see them as inherently unattractive, or unattractive from their own side. Or if I'm having a neutral experience, that will lead me to assume there must be some neutral quality there causing my neutral experience. We'll see them as inherently neutral. Once we get to the third step, step 4 easily follows. Again, let's say we're looking at these flowers and we're having a pleasant experience. We're seeing these as attractive from their own side, inherently attractive. It's there. I like pleasant experiences. I want pleasant experiences. Those flowers seem to be causing my pleasant experience. I want those flowers. Attachment. Or if I'm having an unpleasant experience when I see these flowers, I don't like unpleasant experiences. I don't want unpleasant experiences. Those flowers seem to be causing my unpleasant experience. Get them out of here. Aversion. Or if I'm having a neutral experience, that will simply reinforce my belief that those flowers are existing independent of me, which of course is ignorance. But often here, instead of the word ignorance, you'll see the word confusion. But here, confusion doesn't mean are these flowers or not. We're confused about how they exist. So the word confusion is the same as ignorance. These are the 3 main mental afflictions which lead to all the other mental afflictions. This is driving our behaviour. And every action we do based on a mental affliction, the Buddhist assertion is that has a result. And the result is our various experiences. And our various experiences, the Buddha used in the First Noble Truth the word dukkha to describe those experiences. So this is how we are stuck in this state of dukkha because of our distorted view of reality. This is the process.
The word reaction is not more precise in number 5 than action.
Sorry?
The word reaction is not more precise to describe than action.
I mean, usually in our action here, because of this, we react, but we're just talking about any verbal, physical action, mental action. Yeah, I mean, often it comes in the form of a reaction. I mean, already here we're reacting. This is already a bit of a reaction. We just take it one more step.
So if our perception is free of attachment, so is that the way to cultivate the emptiness?
The question is, we need to get free of attachment.
If we are free of attachment.
Right. But remember, attachment comes from ignorance. So if we want to get rid of attachment 100%, we need to get rid of the cause. How do we get rid of ignorance is the emptiness practice.
So it's the other way around.
Right. Now, of course, there are, normally when I teach this in a sort of a longer course, of course what we see here is that the long-term strategy, how do we overcome dukkha and also the mental afflictions, is we need to get rid of ignorance, so we need to realize this emptiness. So long-term strategy, realize emptiness. But this process, that could take quite a long time. So it might be good to, together with the long-term strategy, we have a short-term strategy. A short-term strategy to try to interrupt this process as much as possible. So in the short-term strategy, we can do various things at various points here to sort of reduce our going to the next step. So here, we can do things to ways of looking at things and so forth to reduce our attachment, to reduce our aversion. So that's also important. But the long-term strategy, of course, if we want to get rid of attachment 100%, we have to get rid of this. Otherwise, the best we can do is reduce the attachment a little bit, which is also, of course, helpful.
But ignorance is there because of perception of reality.
Right.
So we can't get rid of that, obviously.
Sorry?
I'm saying that ignorance is there because our perception of reality.
Ignorance is a false perception of reality. So we need to correct that. We need to develop the correct perception of reality, which is the perception of emptiness. That's right. So, any questions? Yeah.
Is the fifth step the action necessity? Because I imagine...
Is what, sorry?
Is the action a necessity to the dukkha? Because I imagine like the afflictions and the attachment good enough for leading to dukkha.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, when we look at action, it's not just physical and verbal, but mental. So if we have this together with some intention mentally, like maybe we have, here with aversion, some intention of, I hope they suffer. That's already action. Then, of course, if we act on that, that's another step. But already, action can be mental as well. Yeah, very good point.
I can see how you can try to eliminate or reduce your attachment or resentment. But what about neutral feeling? Can you neutralize feeling neutral about something?
Here, remember, we're not talking about changing the feeling. Feeling is not the problem. The problem is what comes together with the feeling is this. This is the problem. So if we get rid of this, then that can't happen. So we're not trying to make all of our feelings pleasant or neutral. Whether it's pleasant, unpleasant, neutral, it's not a problem. It's not a problem. It's what comes together with that is that causes the problem. Feeling doesn't cause problem.
When you're feeling neutral about something, there a negative result for that?
So here, dukkha is, we're not simply talking about these leading to unpleasant suffering experiences. But neutral is simply reinforcing ignorance, which means we're just stuck in this state of dukkha. So will a neutral feeling lead to a harmful behavior? Probably not, but it'll still keep us stuck in that cycle. We're still grasping. So we're not saying that these things here necessarily lead to harmful behavior. We're not saying that.
So is there any other possible way of relating to things other than pleasant, unpleasant, and neutral?
This is not a way of responding. This comes in the experience. So what we're talking about is, based on these experiences, how can we better relate to those experiences or respond to those experiences? That's what we're really talking about. Okay. There's one more point that we'll look at that's in your chart. We say that things appear to exist independent of us, but actually that's not how they exist. Then the question will be, if that's not how they exist, why do they appear to exist in that way? What's the cause of that? The cause of that is ignorance.
So is the cause of itself?
No. Well, what you could say is every time we're grasping, that's reinforcing the habit. So every time we grasp false, that is increasing the habit of grasping. So that's a little tight loop, yes. But ignorance also has another side effect. And the side effect of ignorance is what's called latency of ignorance. It's a technical word. I prefer to use the word stain. Stain. And that means that ignorance stains the mind. The analogy that's often given is, if you have a bowl and you have a clove of garlic, you put the garlic in the bowl. Even if you take the garlic out, the smell of the garlic stains the bowl. A little bit like that, ignorance stains the mind. What does that stain do? Is that stain then acts like a bit like a filter. It means that when we are looking out on the world through the filter of ignorance, that's why all objects appear to exist independent of us. That's the reason. There was a question earlier about the difference from nirvana to enlightenment, and also we talked about when the Buddha is called the Bhagavan, that's someone who's destroyed or eliminated two things, these two obscurations. So there's what's called the afflictive obscurations, which is the mental afflictions. So the afflictive obscurations is all this. Is ignorance plus the mental afflictions. This is the afflictive obscurations. Because these mental afflictions, particularly ignorance, obscures us from achieving nirvana. So if we can get rid of these, particularly if we get rid of ignorance, we can achieve nirvana. But even if we achieve nirvana, these stains are still in our mind. They're very difficult to get rid of. So to move from nirvana to enlightenment, we need to get rid of these stains and this mistaken appearance. So these stains plus this mistaken appearance